Charles in Australia. And I wanted to start off with some of showing the excitement for Charles here, because obviously we have somebody who is not so excited, but there was a lot of concerns, and definitely I was one of them, wondering how much of a good reception the couple would receive, because there were obviously a lot of reports that the Republic movement was going to try to make a big splash in Australia, which apparently really did not happen. But the couple got actually a fantastically warm reception here. So here they're at the Sydney
Jewel, right beside the harbour. With such a short trip and so few chances to see them, the Opera House moment was
10,000
always
people
going to
within
be
the
a
security
sellout
corridor,
show.
and then an additional 2,000 outside, and there are their majesties. So let's kind of try to get in here and see if we can get
the King at 75,
there's a
the
bigger
Queen at
shot of the
77.
crowd. So many people wanting to well wish Charles and Camilla, which I think is absolutely fantastic and amazing, because it's so good to know that, yes, sometimes the Republican side can make a lot of noise, but when push comes to shove, really, there are a lot of monarchists out there. And I think what is a good reminder too is that I heard some people talking about this, because I was trying to go to different sources, trying to get the sort of best information and the feel on the ground. And there's actually a great video, and I will try to remember to just go ahead and maybe link it, or maybe we'll just show it here. Let me try to look at this up here real quick, because I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It's from The Sun, and so I think it's Matt Wilkinson. He does interviews with various people, and they have this whole playlist regarding this tour. And I love some of what they said. I actually would agree with, argue you guys should watch maybe all of this particular video, because I thought it was absolutely fantastic about what is going on the ground. And they do this bit, which I think is fabulous. So just give me a second here, because I was thinking maybe I wouldn't use it, but I think I will go ahead and do that. And they talk about and show the sort of headlines of the day. He is with Arthur Edwards. If you guys are familiar with him, he is a royal photographer and very well known one. And he has been around with them for a long time. And so they do this great little bit talking about the Australian media coverage and how fantastic it has been. So here the two of them are.
Box, curtsying to the King and Queen. A mother says in the copy that she'd been practicing for 20 minutes before they turned up. So
I love that. A little girl practicing her curtsy, wanting to make sure she did it just right. And I think it was Arthur who happened to catch that particular shot. And so you can see it in the headlines. They talk about how positive all the headlines were. So there's the picture, and there's the little girl doing her little curtsy as their majesties walk by. And I do have to apologize, guys. I do have to pause these videos for copyright reasons, but let's keep going.
That was pretty impressive.
She almost stole the show, this girl, didn't she?
Absolutely.
I remember I was looking through the pictures yesterday. You took wonderful pictures, and we're thinking, what pictures are going to grace the front pages of the newspapers tomorrow?
And again, I love how these are two kind of insiders discussing what is going on the front page, because what's going on the front page is going to have a great influence and how the coverage is being portrayed. So let's look at a bit of what their headlines are showing here.
Love you, the Royals.
King and Queen of Hearts right there, guys. Isn't that amazing? And again, guys, this is available on The Sun. If you guys are interested in it, feel free to look it up. And obviously, there is a heckler situation, and we shall get there. But I just thought it would be great to show some of these first.
Not one disparaging remark in the paper. And even the former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, is going on about the importance of a constitutional monarchy for Australia.
Don't you just love that? Even though people talk big that they don't want the royals are too bad. When the royals are there, they love it. That seems to be everybody's the case. They don't like the royals until they're there, and then they're all sort of like royalty, because royalty has that magic. It just does. It is not like celebrity. Yes, Taylor Swift has a bit of magic. Yes, you could say other musical groups. I'm not that caught up with the musical groups, or even actors, although there's not really even much of that anymore. But there's something about royalty, because it is such an exclusive club. It is a club you can either be born into or marry into. Other than that, it's not something you can achieve. It's something you either have or you don't. And it's such a small cadre of people who have it. And the influence of somebody like Charles is very, very real. So there was actually a great little bit of a comic here. Let's see if we can get to it.
Well, you're right. In this one, we've got 2 double-page spreads, or the other paper you had, you've got 2 double-page spreads, and it's almost more coverage in the Australian papers than it is back home in England by the looks of it. I mean, in every picture is happy, positive, king and queen smiling, and they focused on the crowds. They focused on the fact that so many people have come out.
Again, such great positive coverage in the comparison between what is going on in the UK versus Australia. Lovely, lovely thing to see here.
And Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister, has done an opinion piece saying that, long live our ties to the monarch.
Yeah, and the crowd saying, we love you, and why don't you come here more often? And the king replied, oh, it's a long way to come,
So they want him to come more often. So I imagine a trip with Catherine and Williams and the kids would be soon in the offing, or at least I hope so. I think the Waleses, although I love all the love that's being shown to the king, I think it's incredible. Obviously, the future is with the Waleses in many ways. And so you see that now that Charles is coming in there and people are reconnecting to him. You need that period of reconnection, obviously, because you had the queen. So many people respected her majesty, but Charles is in some ways a bit different. And obviously you had the history and legacy of Diana and sort of the tarnishing of Camilla. And Camilla did things she should not have done. And so did Charles and Diana and everyone there. So it is good to see. And I've been seeing a lot of, I don't know if they talk about it here, but a lot of positive reaction to Camilla. I think she is a very, very warm person. And so once people get to really know her, I think they do end up really liking her.
It was engaging, and as you say, the smiles, and Camilla looks stunning, she always does. And I did the walkabout outside the Parliament building, and the people were so hysterically happy.
I love that the people were so hysterically happy. You gotta love it. And I think they show. Do they show the video? I think they show the video here of them walking.
George, Louis, and Charlotte. I cheekily asked what nothing for the other group, but they were present.
Oh, there is an interesting bit here, which I love, and something Harry and Meghan maybe should really zero in on, because when you look at this, there is trouble afoot for Harry and Meghan, I think, in the future. I think Harry and Meghan, and I've said this quite a bit, have made a massive, massive miscalculation in how they've handled their children. And I think if the titles are stripped, no one will care. And we get an indication of that here, because to most of the public, the king only has 3 grandchildren.
I think the rector's wife gave presents for the king's grandchildren. So I obviously asked the king's grandchildren. They said yes, for William and Catherine's children, George, Louis, and Charlotte.
So the rector's wife had presents, but just for the Wales' kids, because apparently, because Harry and Meghan have made their children so absent, nobody believes they exist, partly, and nobody cares. And so they'll give gifts to Charles for the Wales' kids, but they don't even consider Harry and Meghan's children because they're such a non-entity because of how poorly Harry and Meghan have handled them. Like, I don't like to mention Harry and Meghan too much on here, but I find that so fascinating. It's just the public perception, because what Harry and Meghan, I think, have always failed to do is best calculate how to manage their public image, and especially when it relates to royalty, because they want to claim royalty so much, but when push comes to shove, they're like, well, we'll give presents to the Waleses all day. We don't care about the 2 of you or your kids.
I cheekily asked what nothing for the other grandchildren, but no, they'd only got presents, and that was a cricket ball, a rugby ball, and a stuffed koala. So I imagine, they've just been given hundreds of presents, and I imagine that the children will be looking forward to getting them back when we go home.
I sort of love that. So yeah, George, Charlotte, and Louis will be getting plenty of presents. Harry and Meghan's kids, not so much, because nobody cares, because Harry and Meghan have set up the situation where no one cares. Okay, so I wanted to, hopefully, maybe he'll show this here in a second. There is actually a funny cartoon that they show here that was in the paper.
Appointed a minister for this country to become a republic. And since then, it's been disbanded.
Yeah.
So, and the approval rating for a republic is way down there.
So they're talking about, obviously, the coverage and the possibility of a republic here. And apparently that's not something that's very popular in Australia. And Charles has a pretty good approval rating. They actually The Guardian did a poll and showed that there was a 50%, I believe, approval rating for King Charles. For the prime minister, it was 44, and for the parliament, it was 45. So Charles remains a popular figure. And the reason is that royals are above the malaise of politics. And we will see how politicking, I think, goes really wrong, because there is a politician there and she kind of goes about things in a terrible way. But let's look here as they show this little cartoon, which I love. So
To hear Albanese, your Albo, as they call him,
Elbow, yeah.
who's dressed up as a court jester. And I say, a court jester, how amusing. He's your Prime Minister, Your Majesty. That's the cartoon there.
Funny, yeah.
So there in the Australian newspaper, this is actually in the Australian, they talk about how the prime minister is a court jester and their majesties are there kind of regal and completely and utterly normal, you could say. And so I just thought, I wanted to get you. So it says, I say, court jester, how amusing. He's the prime minister, Your Majesty. So I just thought that was absolutely adorable. And so it's so good to see. And it's so good to see just the positive reaction here. And Catherine asks here, real great, is this the first time a king has been to Australia? Actually, yes. I was a bit confused about this because I was like, wait, did we not have Edward and George and George? And like, what happened with those kings? Apparently, they never made the trek over to Australia. So Charles is actually the first reigning king to visit Australia. So very obviously historic occasion. And we will see more with hopefully William and George in the future. And again, I think the monarchy movement is much stronger than some people had anticipated. And I found it funny because I was going through and trying to see, because I think what happens is, like, if you are doing really well and if you're having a big impact, you want to brag about it on social media. The Republic movement, the leader, Graham Smith, I looked up his Twitter account, or X as you kind of call it today. And there was like nothing on there except for responding to other people. I'm like, oh, you guys got shut out, didn't you? Nobody showed up because he made a big splash about stalking King Charles all the way to Australia. And as it turned out, the Republican movement in Australia is microscopically small. It was reported that there was about 12 protesters they could muster up at one visit. So they did have that. And again, we have the other instance too. But let me share, just because it's always good to share a funny video. So apparently His Majesty the King got to meet a lovely alpaca. And the alpaca did not really realize the regal hand he was sniffing, because he sneezed all over Charles. So let's get into it here real quick. Hopefully we can get to the right spot, because I think it's a little bit into the coverage. So there we go. I don't know. We'll go back in case you guys missed it, because it is really cute. Maybe we'll slow it down for a second so you can really kind of see the little alpaca movement. We'll just turn the sound off because the sound gets weird. But so there's the alpaca. He's got a crown on his head. Charles goes to say hi, and then sneezing all over the king. You know what they say is don't work with kids, and obviously usually they say dogs or pets. But in this instance, it is just so cute, I think, for sure. And I just love this little interaction. I love the alpaca with the crown, and anytime you can see royals having kind of that natural reaction is great. And obviously, again, so much love for Charles here in Australia with the people, with the alpaca, and there's a big security presence as well. And I think they were definitely very, very concerned about what possibly could result from potential protests and stuff like that. And as it turns out, pretty minimal. But of course, there is always that oh so difficult soul. And in this instance, it is a senator from Australia whose name is Lydia Thorpe. And according to what I have seen and sort of researched about this a little bit, is that she's sort of known for these kind of stunts. And she is obviously somebody who wants to, you could say, fight against, or she wants to reestablish Aborigine rights, and she wants the land from the indigenous people return to them and anti-colonialists and all these sorts of things. And she does what people who have no ideas or who have no, I would argue, a ton of, you could say, brain power do in order to get attention. And I will say these sorts of things because it is just important to remind ourselves if you want something done, don't have a tantrum like a 2-year-old. It's probably best not to do that. So let's listen to a little bit of this here. So this is right after King Charles gives a speech to the parliament here. I was gonna try to get some of his speech, but honestly, the audio is not great. So it just was hard to kind of hear. So, but this is a little bit.
This is what you stole from us. Our bones, our skulls, our babies, our people. You destroyed our land.
And Matt Wilkinson pointed out, and I think Arthur Edwards did as too, it was dead silent when she kind of had her tantrum here.
Give us a treaty. We want a treaty in this country. You are a genocide.
And what I think is funny is that she made this whole tantrum and then they're all kind of giggling at her a bit. And I would argue probably it's more like nervous laughter, but you can see both Charles and Camilla here. Well, you can see Charles or Camilla here in particular. And this is from the Royal Family Channel. And she also says F the colonists or colony or something like that. And her argument is, and I was looking at and trying to do a bit of research on it, she's talking about these skulls and bones. And just for reference point, there were skulls and bones from the original indigenous people of Australia. I'm like there's so many terminologies sometimes and I get them mixed up, but there's some of them that are actually in storage basically at the British Museum. And so she's asking for the replacement of those to be returned to the people. And there's some artifacts from the indigenous people scattered throughout museums in the United Kingdom. There may be some held within the Royal Collection Trust as well. That wasn't really sure based on the Guardian article I read. But it said in particular, when it comes to the British Museum, they cannot return these things home. They've sort of made basically an agreement with themselves, I guess, not to return things. And so it's not like they can really return them. And then another issue that she's had, which she can't even address because she's yelling about like bones and skulls and stuff, which is not really the true issue here, is about there's an overrepresentation of Aborigine children within their foster system. I can't remember exactly what term they use, but it's within their foster system. And when I look at that and somebody sort of yelling about those kind of things, I kind of wonder, I was like, are you not a politician? Is that not your job to address that? Why are you yelling at him? He can't do any of that. You're the politician in power. You're the one who can actually make changes. Why are you yelling at a guy who can't? And I find this with people who just they're not people who can actually accomplish things. They just need to yell at somebody else and put all the blame on them. Because even though she could actually address these issues herself, because Charles is, yes, the head of state, but when it comes to the intricacies of the policies in Australia, he leaves that to you. You're the one who has the power. Why are you yelling at him? And she says she's written to him numerous times and he has not responded. I was like, well, maybe he didn't get your message because they sort of, screened it and decided that you weren't really worth talking to, because you can't really talk to somebody who's throwing a tantrum. It's not really work. You can't, again, you can't negotiate. I want to say with terrorists, but that's not quite right. But you kind of get the sense that you just can't negotiate with somebody like that because they have no kind of grasp on reality. They can't move things a particular way. And they're resorting, when they can't get the things that they want, they resort to yelling and screaming into the void. And that's just not conductive to a good conversation. And so I just don't like those particular things, but does also raise another interesting issue, which is the history of colonialism within, obviously, how Europe has operated throughout the centuries, particularly after the late 1400s. And there were, of course, atrocities that happened, 150%. But I think the emphasis on, especially when in some of her tirades, she's like, you are responsible for genocide. I was like, no, he's not. Maybe his ancestors were part of that, but not him individually. I don't like people who put the burden from something that happened centuries ago on the current person who had nothing to do with it. Yes, he is involved in the institution that has this line throughout history, but obviously, has the institution not changed since then? I believe it has. I believe it's changed. If it was enacting and doing the same things, of course, you would have the right. But if it's not doing the same things, then, what are you complaining about? I mean, Australia pretty much has massive autonomy. So things happened too as well in terms of history. I think sometimes people forget because we live in a modern age where you could say conquests don't happen much, but conquest is just a part of history. I mean, are the Brits right now yelling across the pond at the French for William the Conqueror coming in and conquering and changing really the face of the future of England in many ways? The Anglo-Saxon influence diminished as it clashed with the Norman influence. And some of the original, let's say, cultural practices of the Brits got superseded by that of the Normans. And so why are the Brits not yelling across the pond? Oh, I guess across the pond is across the Atlantic, but why are they not yelling across the channel at the French? They should be doing that. Again, conquering is just a part of history. We just don't see it as much anymore in our modern age, but it's just kind of a fact. And if we go back through all the ancient grievances that we all have, we would be driving all of ourselves bonkers in the process. So I think the best course of action always is to learn exactly what happened, report exactly what happened, and make sure it never happens again. And anything you can resolve, like maybe some lingering laws or something like that, yes, address those. But I think having people apologize or go too far into trying to appease a certain lobby, I think is usually followed with, well, you've apologized, so where's, my handout type of thing. And that I think is just not the way any country should really be operating. You shouldn't be waiting for a paycheck in order to be successful. If you're a politician in power, it's your job to change things and make things better. Don't look for a handout from somebody else. That is just my 2 cents on the topic, because I feel like history is so lost anymore that nobody really knows it. It's just kind of just find it sad because I like history. And I think history is so important in understanding our modern era. So that is Charles and Camilla currently in Australia. They will be heading soon to Samoa.